He was disgusted by his fat daughter. So disgusted, he sold her to the mountain man. In the middle of town, with the church bell tolling and every eye watching, a father traded his own flesh and blood for a single coin. Everyone thought the girl's life was ruined forever. But when the mountain man carried her away into the high country, something no one expected began to unfold. Because instead of cruelty, she found kindness. Instead of shame, she discovered strength. And hidden deep in the cabin's firelight, something even more dangerous stirred rumors, slander, and a father's thirst for control. Now, the snow is falling, the town is whispering, and the truth is about to break wide open. Will the girl who was sold as nothing rise to prove her worth before God and man? Or will her father's rage destroy the only love she has ever known? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter winter wind howled through the streets of the small Colorado trading post, whipping at skirts and coats as townsfolk huddled near the livery stable. The scent of hay and horses mingled with the sharp bite of approaching snow. Wooden signs creaked on their hinges, and somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut against the growing storm. Cora stood with her head bowed, her cheeks burning red as her father's words cut deeper than the icy wind. The rancher's voice carried across the yard, each syllable dripping with contempt. "Ain't nothing but a burden," he spat, gesturing at her with a dismissive wave, eating more than her share while doing half the work of a proper daughter. His boots crunched in the frozen mud as he circled her like a predator. "Look at her, fat as a spring heifer and twice as useless." Whispers rippled through the gathered crowd. Some looked away, unable to bear witness to such cruelty. Others watched with the morbid fascination of those who'd rather see someone else suffer than risk drawing attention to themselves. Cora caught glimpses of familiar faces. Mrs. Peterson from the general store, who'd always slipped her an extra piece of candy. Tom Walker, the blacksmith who'd fixed her boots last summer without charging. But none would meet her eye now. The rancher's voice grew louder, his anger feeding off the audience. 20 years I've fed her, clothed her, put up with her lazy ways. And what have I got to show for it? He grabbed Cora's arm, forcing her to stumble forward. "Nothing but shame!" A movement at the edge of the crowd drew Cora's tear-filled eyes. Adriel Boone stood there, tall and imposing in his weathered buckskins. His dark eyes took in the scene, his expression unreadable beneath his beard. Unlike the others, he didn't look away when their gazes met. "If she's such a burden," Boone's deep voice cut through the wind, "I'll take her off your hands." The rancher's grip loosened in surprise. "What's that?" Boone stepped forward, his movements deliberate as a mountain cat. He reached into his coat and pulled out a single gold coin. The metal caught what little sunlight remained, gleaming like a promise. "1 eagle. Fair trade for what you call worthless." The rancher's eyes narrowed, darting between the coin and his daughter. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Done." He snatched the coin from Boone's outstretched hand. "She's your problem now." With a rough shove, he pushed Cora toward the mountain man. She stumbled, her worn boots sliding on the icy ground, but Boone's steady hand caught her elbow. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused by years of trapping and survival in the high country. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Old Widow Jenkins crossed herself, while young Billy Thompson was quickly hushed by his mother when he asked what was happening. The trading post owner, Mr. Harrison, took a half-step forward but stopped when the plaint of the mains. Rancher's cold gaze swept the crowd, challenging anyone to interfere. "Get your things," Boone said quietly to Cora, his voice pitched for her ears alone. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I don't have much, just what's in my satchel by the hitching post." Boone nodded once, keeping his hand at her elbow as they walked to where his animals waited. A sturdy mountain horse stood beside a long-eared mule, both animals well-equipped for the harsh terrain of the high country. The mule's packs bulged with supplies, the reason for Boone's rare trip into town. Cora's small leather satchel waited where she'd left it, containing all she owned in the world: her mother's Bible, a spare dress, And the carved wooden bird her brother had made her before consumption took him 3 winters ago. Her fingers trembled as she clutched it to her chest. The crowd watched in tense silence as Boone helped her mount his horse. The saddle was worn but well maintained, the leather creaking as she settled her weight. She felt exposed, sitting so high while everyone stared, but Boone's presence beside her acted like a shield against their scrutiny. He swung onto the mule with practiced ease, gathering the reins in his gloved hands. The animal's ears flicked back, attentive to its master's signals. Without another word or glance at the gathered townsfolk, Boone clicked his tongue, and they started forward. The sound of hooves on frozen ground echoed in the growing dusk. Cora could feel the town's eyes burning into her back as they rode away, but she didn't dare turn around. She kept her gaze fixed on her hands, clenched tight around the saddle horn, as they passed the last buildings and started up the trail that led into the mountains. The wind grew sharper as they climbed, carrying the promise of snow. Clouds gathered overhead, heavy and gray as iron. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of hooves, the creak of leather, and the occasional snort from their mounts. Cora's mind whirled with questions and fears. She knew of Adriel Boone. Everyone did. He was a legend in these parts, as much a part of the mountains as the pines and peaks themselves. Some said he'd gone wild after losing his wife years ago, choosing the company of trees and animals over people. Others whispered that he was the only man brave enough to trade with both settlers and natives, respected by both for his fair dealings and quiet strength. But now, riding beside him into the gathering darkness, she realized she knew nothing real about the man who had just bought her with a single coin. Was this rescue, or something else? Had she traded one form of cruelty for another? The only certainty was that she could never return to the life she'd known. Not after this public humiliation, this final rejection from the father who had never wanted her. The trail narrowed as it wound higher into the foothills. Boone led them single file now, the mule picking its way carefully over the rough ground. The first snowflakes began to fall, dancing in the last light of day before settling on Cora's shawl. She shivered, more from emotional exhaustion than cold. "There's a heavy coat in the saddlebag." Boone spoke for the first time since leaving town, his voice startling in the wilderness quiet. "You'll need it where we're heading." Cora reached down with trembling fingers and found the coat. Thick wool lined with fur, warm from being pressed against the horse's flank. As she pulled it around her shoulders, she caught the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, the smell of the mountains themselves. "Thank you," she whispered. Though whether for the coat or for saving her from public shame, she wasn't sure. Boone merely nodded, his attention seemingly focused on the trail ahead. But as the darkness deepened and the snow began to fall in earnest, Cora noticed how he kept the mule's pace steady, ensuring her horse could follow safely. How he chose the smoothest path when the trail forked. How he positioned himself to break the worst of the wind. They climbed higher into the gathering night, leaving behind the world she'd known, moving toward an uncertain future in the high country. The town's shocked faces and whispered judgments faded with each step, replaced by the soft sound of snow falling on pine boughs and the steady breathing of their mounts. The rancher's final cruel words echoed in her mind, but they seemed to lose some of their power in this wild place. Here, where the mountains touched the sky and the wind spoke secrets to the trees, perhaps she could become something more than what her father had declared her to be. Perhaps, in this strange new chapter of her life, she could find a way to be strong. As if reading her thoughts, Boone's voice carried back to her, gentle but firm against the wind. "Not much further now. Watch your horse's footing here. The trail gets steep." Cora straightened in the saddle, pulling the borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. Whatever lay ahead, she had no choice but to face it with as much courage as she could muster. She sent up a silent prayer, remembering the Bible tucked safely in her satchel, and urged her horse forward into the deepening night. The mountain trail wound ever higher as Adriel led them away from the trading post. The snow had started falling more heavily now, dusting Cora's shoulders and catching in her hair. Despite her best efforts to hide it, a violent shiver ran through her body. The thin shawl she wore offered little protection against the biting wind. Adriel glanced back, his keen eyes taking in her trembling form. Without a word, he reined his mule to a halt and dismounted. The leather of his coat creaked as he shrugged it off, revealing a thick wool shirt beneath. He held the coat up to her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You'll freeze before we reach the cabin," he said simply. Cora hesitated, her fingers tight on the reins. The coat looked warm, lined with soft fur and weathered by years of use. But accepting it felt like accepting something more, admitting her weakness, her need for help. "I'm fine," she managed through chattering teeth. Adriel didn't lower his arm. "Pride won't keep you warm. Take it." There was no judgment in his voice, no mockery like she'd grown accustomed to hearing. Just practical concern. After another moment's hesitation, Cora reached down and accepted the coat. It was heavy in her hands, still warm from his body. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping it on. The fur collar brushed against her cheek, and the sleeves fell past her fingers. It smelled of pine sap and wood smoke, of wild places and solitude. Adriel nodded once, then remounted his mule. They continued their journey, the animal's hooves crunching through the fresh snow. The coat made a world of difference. Cora could feel feeling returning to her fingers and toes. After about an hour's ride, they came to a creek, its surface frozen except for a narrow channel of dark water running swift and cold. Adriel dismounted again, leading both animals to where they could drink safely. "We'll rest here a spell," he said, already gathering dry wood from beneath a sheltering pine. "Animals need water, and we should eat something before the next stretch." Cora slid carefully from the saddle, her legs stiff from riding. She watched as Adriel efficiently built a small fire, shielding the flame from the wind until it caught. The warmth was welcome, though she knew it wouldn't last long. From his saddlebags, Adriel produced a packet wrapped in oilcloth. He offered her a strip of jerky and a handful of dried berries. The meat was tough, but flavorful, and Cora realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. Her father hadn't allowed her breakfast, claiming she'd already eaten more than her share that week. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. Snow continued to fall, but the pine boughs overhead caught most of it. Adriel kept his eyes on the sky, reading signs Cora couldn't see. "Storm's coming," he said finally. "Not a bad one, but we'll need to be careful. Mountain weather can turn mighty quick up here." He looked at her directly for the first time since leaving town. "Trail gets steeper from here. You ride well enough, but stay close. There's places where a wrong step could mean trouble." Cora nodded, grateful for the practical advice. He wasn't treating her like a burden or a possession, but like someone capable of understanding and following direction. The difference from her father's constant belittling was stark. They stamped out the fire and mounted up again. True to Adriel's word, the trail grew more challenging. It switched back and forth across the mountainside, sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass. The wind picked up, driving the snow harder against them. As darkness began to fall, Adriel spoke again. "Cabin's not far now. Maybe half an hour if we keep this pace." He paused, then added, "You can stay there long as you need, until you figure what you want to do next." The words caught Cora by surprise. She'd expected, well, she wasn't sure what she'd expected after being sold for a coin, but not this simple offer of shelter without demands attached. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why would you help me?" Adriel was quiet so long she thought he hadn't heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but clear. "No person should be treated like property. What your father did wasn't right. Cabin's got space, and winter's no time to be without shelter. That's all there is to it." Simple words, but they brought unexpected tears to Cora's eyes. She blinked them away quickly before they could freeze on her cheeks. The last of the daylight was gone when they finally reached the cabin. It stood in a small clearing, built of solid logs with a stone chimney. Adriel helped her dismount, then led the animals to a lean-to stable built against one wall. He worked quickly by touch, removing saddles and packs, making sure both animals were properly cared for, before leading Cora to the cabin's door. Inside, he moved with the confidence of long habit, lighting a lantern that cast a warm glow through the single room. The cabin was simple but well-maintained. A bed stood in one corner, its quilt neat and folded. A heavy table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a cast-iron stove waited ready for fire. Shelves lined one wall, holding provisions and cooking implements. Everything was organized, if somewhat dusty. "Make yourself comfortable," Adriel said, already working to start a fire in the stove. "I'll fix us something hot to eat." Cora stood uncertainly by the table, still wearing his coat. The cabin was cold, but she could feel it warming as the fire caught in the stove. She watched as Adriel moved efficiently around the small space, pulling out supplies: beans, flour, a bit of salt pork. He worked quickly, mixing flour and water for bannock bread, while the beans heated in a pot. Soon, the cabin was filled with the smell of cooking food and the warmth of the fire. The familiar domestic sounds and scents helped ease some of the tension from Cora's shoulders. When the food was ready, Adriel filled 2 tin plates and set them on the table. "It's simple fare," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "But it'll warm you up." Cora sat carefully, removing his coat now that the cabin was warm. The beans were well seasoned, and the bannock was fresh and hot. After the long, cold ride, it tasted better than any fancy meal she could imagine. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of wind outside. Cora couldn't help but marvel at how different this meal was from those at her father's table, where every bite had been accompanied by criticism and cruel remarks about her appetite. Here, in this simple cabin with this quiet man, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. Not just physical safety, though that was certainly part of it, but the safety of being treated with basic human dignity, of being offered food without strings attached, of being seen as a person rather than a burden. The realization that she had entered an entirely different life settled over her as she finished her meal. Everything she had known, the daily humiliations, the constant fear, the crushing weight of her father's disapproval, all of it was behind her now. What lay ahead was uncertain, but at least she had been offered the chance to face it on her own terms. Morning light crept through the gaps in the cabin's wooden shutters, painting thin golden lines across the rough-hewn floor. Cora stirred on her straw-filled bedroll, which Adriel had insisted she take while he slept in a chair by the stove. The steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood echoed from outside, each crack sharp and clean in the mountain air. She sat up slowly, working the stiffness from her shoulders. The cabin looked different in daylight, smaller, but somehow more welcoming. Everything had its place, from the neat stack of tin plates to the rows of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A fire still smoldered in the stove, keeping the worst of the morning chill at bay. The sound of chopping continued outside. Cora wrapped herself in the quilt Adriel had given her and made her way to the door. The cold hit her face like a splash of water, but the sun was bright, making the fresh snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. Adriel stood in a cleared space near a huge woodpile, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. His movements were practiced and efficient as he split log after log. He paused when he noticed her, nodding in greeting. "Sleep well?" he asked, driving the axe into a stump and wiping his brow. "Yes, thank you," Cora replied, surprised to find it true. Despite everything that had happened yesterday, she had slept better than she had in years. "Reckon I should show you around," Adriel said, pulling on his coat. "Need to know where things are, if you're staying a spell." He led her first to a clear spring that bubbled up from between rocks, not far from the cabin. "Never freezes completely," he explained. "Best water you'll ever taste." He demonstrated how to break the thin ice at the edges to fill a bucket. Next came the chicken coop, a sturdy structure attached to the cabin's lee side. 6 hens pecked at scattered feed, clucking softly. "They're good layers," Adriel said, reaching in to collect 2 brown eggs. "Keep us in breakfast when the weather permits." The small barn stood nearby, where his mule and horse were already fed and comfortable in their stalls. The building smelled of hay and leather, familiar scents that made Cora think of simpler times before her mother passed. Adriel showed her where he kept the feed and tack, explaining matter-of-factly how to care for the animals if he was away checking his trap lines. Back outside, Adriel paused by the woodpile. Without ceremony, he handed her the axe. "Might as well learn," he said. "Never know when you'll need to split your own wood." The axe felt heavy and awkward in Cora's hands. She positioned a log as she'd seen him do, but her first swing went wide, barely grazing the wood. Her second attempt stuck in the log without splitting it. "Here," Adriel said, not unkindly. He adjusted her grip on the handle. "Let the weight of the axe do the work. Just guide it down." He stepped back, watching as she tried again. This time, the log split with a satisfying crack. The pieces fell to either side, and Cora couldn't help but smile. Her father had never allowed her to do such work, claiming she'd only hurt herself or break his tools. "I want to learn more," she said firmly, already reaching for another log. Adriel nodded, something like approval flickering across his usually stern features. "Plenty of wood needs splitting," he said. "Take your time. Work at it steady." They spent the next hour with Cora practicing on smaller logs, while Adriel tackled the larger ones. Her arms ached, but she refused to quit until she had a decent pile of kindling to show for her efforts. As the sun climbed higher, Adriel began explaining his trapping routes, pointing out the different trails that led from the cabin. "Got lines set in 3 directions," he said. "Take about 2 days to check them all. Need to know which way I've gone if there's trouble." He showed her the marks he made on trees to indicate his paths, then pointed to the massive woodpile against the cabin wall. "Storm season's coming. Need enough wood to last weeks if we get snowed in. Mountain weather's no joke. Can turn deadly quick if you're not prepared." By afternoon, clouds were gathering over the peaks, and the air had taken on the heavy feeling that preceded snow. Cora's muscles protested as she helped carry the last armload of split wood inside, but she felt oddly satisfied. For the first time in years, she was doing real work, contributing something useful. When Adriel mentioned supper, Cora quickly offered to help. She found herself wanting to prove she could do more than just take up space. In the cabin, she located a pot and began preparing vegetables while Adriel brought in fresh meat from his storehouse. "I can cook," she said, reaching for the ingredients with confidence. "Mother taught me before." She trailed off, the memory still tender after all these years. Adriel just nodded, letting her take the lead. Soon, a hearty stew was simmering on the stove, filling the cabin with savory aromas. Snow had begun falling outside, thick flakes drifting past the window. They ate at the table, the lantern casting warm light across their bowls. The silence between them was comfortable until Adriel cleared his throat. "Need to tell you something," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "About yesterday, at the trading post." He set down his spoon, meeting her eyes directly. "Bought you to stop your father's cruelty, nothing more. You're not beholden to me, free to leave whenever you choose, once the weather permits." Cora's spoon clattered against her bowl. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. "But your coin," she stammered. "Your reputation. Why would you risk so much?" Adriel shrugged, his face shadowed in the lantern light. "No person deserves to be treated like an animal," he said simply. "What your father did wasn't right. Couldn't stand by and watch it happen." He paused, then added quietly, "Been alone up here a long time. Know what it's like to feel trapped. Figured you deserved a choice at least." Tears pricked at Cora's eyes, but she blinked them back. She thought of all the small kindnesses he'd shown her since yesterday. The coat, the bedroll, teaching her to split wood instead of dismissing her as useless. Each one a reminder of her humanity, freely given without expectation. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd done. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, Cora felt warmer than she had in years, wrapped in the simple dignity of being treated as a person worthy of respect. 2 days passed, like water flowing in the mountain stream. Cora had begun settling into the rhythm of cabin life, learning to tend the chickens and help with daily chores. The morning sun had just cleared the peaks when hoofbeats echoed up the snowy trail. Adriel stepped out first, rifle ready, but held low. His shoulders relaxed slightly when he recognized the rider, the circuit preacher making his way up on a sturdy brown mare. The minister's saddlebags bulged with supplies, and his black coat was dusted with snow. "Morning, Boone," the preacher called out, dismounting stiffly. His breath clouded in the cold air as he led his horse toward the cabin. "Brought some provisions from town. Folks were concerned about. Supplies, what with the weather coming." Adriel nodded, taking the horse's reins. "Much obliged. I'll see to your mare." He led the animal toward the barn, leaving Cora and the preacher alone by the cabin door. The older man's expression grew stern as he turned to her. "Miss Cora," he said quietly, glancing to ensure Adriel was out of earshot. "I must speak plainly. Your situation here is causing quite a scandal below." Cora's stomach clenched. She'd known there would be talk, but hearing it confirmed made her face burn with shame. "There are whispers," the preacher continued, his voice low and troubled. "Suggestions about why Boone might have purchased you. Shameful allegations about his intentions." He shook his head. "I've tried to quiet such talk, but you must understand how this appears." Before Cora could respond, Adriel returned from the barn. His face was unreadable as he approached them, but he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the morning light, the gold coin from the trading post. "Here," he said, holding it out to the preacher. "Take this back to town. There's no debt between us now." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. The preacher hesitated before accepting the coin. "A gesture of good faith, perhaps," he acknowledged, "but I fear it may not be enough to stem the tide of gossip. Poison spreads quickly in small communities, and reputations once stained are not easily cleansed." "We've done nothing wrong," Cora protested, finding her voice at last. But it came out smaller than she'd intended, wavering with uncertainty. "Sometimes truth matters less than appearance," the preacher replied gently. He adjusted his coat and glanced at the gathering clouds. "I should return before the weather worsens. Consider what I've said." With a final meaningful look at them both, he mounted his horse and started back down the trail. Cora watched him go, feeling as though he'd taken all her newfound confidence with him. The past 2 days of learning and working alongside Adriel had given her a taste of what it meant to be valued, to be treated with respect. Now those tender shoots of dignity seemed frozen by the cold wind of scandal. She glanced at Adriel, but he had already turned away, grabbing an axe and heading toward the woodpile. His movements were sharper than usual as he split log after log, the crack of wood echoing against the mountainside like gunshots. The snow began falling heavier as the afternoon wore on. They worked mostly in silence, hauling wood to the cabin and clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop. The physical labor helped distract Cora from her troubled thoughts, but shame clung to her like a shadow. "Storm settling in," Adriel observed as they finished the last load of wood. It was his first comment since the preacher's departure. "Might be in for a long spell." Cora nodded, brushing snow from her skirts. "I'll check on the chickens one more time before dark." The evening closed in early, darkness gathering thick beyond the cabin windows. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Cora retrieved her mother's Bible from her few possessions. The familiar leather binding was worn smooth with age, the pages marked with dried flowers and her mother's neat notations in the margins. She sat close to the lamp, drawing comfort from the well-known words. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read softly. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." From his chair by the fire, Adriel remained silent, but she noticed he didn't leave as he usually did when she read. The lamplight cast long shadows on the wall as she continued through the Psalms, verses of mercy and refuge washing over her like gentle rain. "For his anger endureth but a moment, in his favor is life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Her voice caught slightly on the words, thinking of her own nights of weeping in her father's house. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, Wind whistled through the trees, and snow continued to fall. But inside the cabin, something fragile was taking shape. A quiet understanding, a shared peace in the midst of storm. Adriel stirred in his chair, adding another log to the fire. His movements were careful, as if trying not to disturb the tranquility that had settled over them. Yet Cora could see the trouble in his face, the way his brow furrowed when he thought she wasn't looking. The preacher's warnings echoed in her mind. What would become of them when spring came and the mountain paths cleared? How long could they exist in this strange balance? Neither owner and chattel nor man and wife, but something undefined that the town below would never understand. Cora turned another page in her Bible, the lamp casting a warm glow on the verses before her. But thou, O Lord, art a God full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering, and plenteous in mercy and truth. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, a reminder that even in the midst of scandal and shadow, there was still room for grace. Outside, the snow continued to deepen, wrapping the cabin in a blanket of white silence, while within, two souls weathered their own storm of uncertainty together. The storm howled through the night, piling snow in deep drifts against the cabin walls. By morning, the world outside had transformed into a sea of white. Cora woke to find frost patterns decorating the inside of the window panes, delicate as lace. Might be stuck here a spell, Adriel said over breakfast, his voice matter of fact. Trail won't be passable for at least a day, maybe two. Cora nodded, watching as he pulled a collection of metal traps from a trunk near the hearth. The steel mechanisms clinked against each other as he laid them out on the rough-hewn table. Might as well make use of the time, he continued, settling onto the bench. These need mending, before spring season. He gestured for her to join him, then picked up the first trap, showing her how the spring mechanism worked. See here? Rust can make it stick. Gotta keep it clean and oiled, or you'll lose your catch. His calloused fingers demonstrated the proper movement. Want to try? Cora hesitated only a moment before taking the trap he offered. The metal felt cold and heavy in her hands, but she was determined to learn. Following his instructions, she began cleaning the rust from the joints with an old rag. Hour by hour, the day passed in quiet industry. Adriel proved a patient teacher, showing her how to oil the hinges and test the springs. When she successfully repaired her first trap, the satisfaction in her chest felt warm and unfamiliar. You've got steady hands, Adriel observed, inspecting her work. That's good. In the afternoon, he brought out some pelts that needed preparation. The rabbit furs were soft under her fingers as he demonstrated how to stretch and scrape them. Cora found herself fascinated by the process, asking questions about the different types of fur and their uses. Beaver's worth the most, he explained, showing her a thick pelt. But rabbit's more common, and folks always need warm linings for their clothes. The second day of their confinement passed similarly, with Adriel sharing more of his trapping knowledge. Cora absorbed it all eagerly, surprising herself with how quickly she learned. Her father's words about her being useless seemed to fade a little more with each new skill mastered. When the weather finally cleared on the third morning, the sun sparkled blindingly off the fresh snow. Adriel announced they should check the snares he'd set before the storm. Might be nothing there, he said as they prepared to leave. But we need to clear the trail anyway. He helped Cora wrap her feet in extra cloth before pulling on her boots, protection against the deep snow. Before they left, Cora packed a small bag with dried apples and jerky. Her father would have called it women's foolishness to think of food for such a short journey, but Adriel nodded approvingly when he saw her preparation. The mile-long trek to the snare line was challenging. Snow had drifted knee-deep in places, and Cora's legs burned with the effort of walking through it. But she pressed on without complaint, determined to prove herself capable. They found 2 rabbits in the snares, frozen solid in the cold. Adriel showed her how to reset the traps, his movements quick and efficient in the bitter air. Cora watched carefully, memorizing each step. On their return journey, smoke from a small fire caught their attention. Through the trees, they spotted a group of Ute neighbors gathering wood. Adriel altered their course slightly to approach them, calling out a greeting while they were still at a distance. Cora's heart beat faster as they drew near. She had never been this close to native people before, and stories from ignorant townspeople made her nervous. But Adriel's respectful manner reassured her. The small family group, a man, woman, and 2 children, returned Adriel's greeting calmly. The woman was loading wood onto a hand-drawn sledge, while the children helped gather smaller branches. Steam rose from a pot of something warming over their small fire. Cora watched as Adriel and the Ute man exchanged news about the weather and hunting conditions, their conversation easy but sparse. The Ute children eyed her curiously from behind their mother. Gathering her courage, Cora reached into her bag and pulled out the dried apples she'd packed. She stepped forward carefully through the snow, holding them out to the Ute woman. "Would you like to share?" she asked softly. The woman's face softened into a smile as she accepted the offering. "Thank you," she said in clear English, then spoke to her children in their own language. The little ones came forward eagerly as their mother distributed the fruit. Cora felt warmth spread through her chest as she watched them enjoy the simple treat. The woman offered them some of their own dried meat in return, and they stood together in the snow, sharing food and silent companionship. When it was time to move on, the Ute woman touched Cora's arm gently. "Come again," she said. "We gather wood here often." The rest of the walk back to the cabin seemed easier somehow, despite tired legs and cold feet. The winter sun was setting as they finally stamped the snow from their boots at the cabin door. That evening, after they'd warmed themselves and eaten a hot supper, Cora found herself speaking of things she'd never shared before. The lamplight cast a gentle glow as words spilled out like water from a long-sealed spring. "All my life, people mocked me," she said quietly, staring into her cup of tea. "Father said I ate too much, took up too much space. The other girls laughed at my size, at how I didn't fit into their pretty dresses." Adriel sat silent in his chair, but she could feel him listening. "Even reading my Bible brought scorn," she continued. "Father said scripture wouldn't fill empty bellies or do useful work. But Mama's Bible was all I had left of her, and the words, they gave me hope when nothing else did." She fell silent, wondering if she'd said too much. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing on the walls. Finally, Adriel spoke, his voice low but clear. "You've got more grit than most settlers I've met," he said. "Seen plenty who talk big in town but can't handle real mountain living. You learn quick, work hard, and show kindness to strangers. That's worth more than fitting into pretty dresses." Cora felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her true measure and found her worthy. Pride, an emotion so foreign she almost didn't recognize it, flickered to life in her heart. She looked down at her hands, roughened now from work with traps and pelts, and saw them differently. These were hands that could create, could help, could offer friendship across boundaries of language and culture. They were capable hands, strong hands, not the useless appendages her father had claimed them to be. The evening deepened around them as they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts while the wind whispered through the pine trees outside. In the corner, Cora's Bible lay on its shelf, its presence a quiet reminder that sometimes the most precious wisdom comes not from those who shout the loudest, but from the still, small voices that speak of hope and worth and dignity. A week after the snowstorm, the quiet rhythm of mountain life was broken by desperate pounding at the cabin door. Adriel opened it to find the Sanders family from town, mother, father, and their 10-year-old son Bobby wrapped in blankets and shivering. "Please, Mrs." Sanders pleaded, her face drawn with worry. "Bobby's burning up with fever. We couldn't make it back to town in this weather." Her husband supported the boy, who swayed on his feet, cheeks flushed red against pale skin. Adriel ushered them inside, while Cora immediately cleared space near the fire. "Bring him here," she said, spreading her thickest quilt on the floor. The boy's parents helped him lie down, and Cora felt his forehead. Heat radiated from his skin. "I've got herbs that might help," Adriel said, already moving to the shelf where he kept his medicines. "Willow bark for the fever, and some others." Cora nodded. remembering her mother's teachings about caring for the sick. "We'll need cool water too," she said, reaching for a clean cloth. "And more blankets, the fever might break with sweating." While Adriel prepared the herbal tea, Cora settled beside Bobby, speaking softly to him as she bathed his hot face. "Mrs. Sanders hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "How long has he been ill?" Cora asked, noting the boy's rapid breathing. 2 days, Mr. Sanders answered. "We were visiting kin up north when it started. Tried to make it home, but the trail's too rough in the dark." Adriel returned with a steaming cup. "This doesn't taste good," he warned Bobby, "but it'll help." Together, they helped the boy sit up enough to sip the bitter brew. As night deepened, the Sanders took turns resting, while Cora remained steadfast by Bobby's side. She refused all suggestions that she sleep, instead keeping careful watch over her young patient. Through the long hours, she cooled his brow, helped him sip water, and prayed aloud in a quiet voice. "Dear Lord," she whispered, dabbing Bobby's face, "please ease this child's suffering. Grant him strength to heal." Her mother's Bible lay open beside her, its familiar passages offering comfort in the flickering firelight. Adriel stayed awake too, tending the fire and brewing fresh herb tea whenever needed. He watched Cora's gentle persistence with something like admiration in his eyes, though he said nothing. Near dawn, Bobby's fever finally broke. Cora felt the change first, his skin growing cooler, his breathing easier. The boy's eyes opened, clear for the first time in hours. "Mama?" he called weakly. Mrs. Sanders rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face as she gathered him in her arms. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, rocking him gently. "Thank God and thank you," she said to Cora, reaching out to grasp her hand. "You're an angel to have watched over him so." Cora blushed at the praise, but smiled tiredly. "I only did what anyone would do," she said. "No," Mr. Sanders spoke up. "Not anyone would have stayed up all night praying for a stranger's child. We won't forget this kindness." After breakfast, when the Sanders family prepared to leave, Mrs. Sanders hugged Cora tightly. "You have a gift for healing," she whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you different." The story of Bobby's recovery spread through the scattered mountain community. Over the next few weeks, other families began stopping by the cabin, some needing help with mending clothes, others asking Cora's advice about sick children or injured animals. She welcomed them all with the same quiet kindness. Between visitors, Cora kept busy around the cabin. She organized Adriel's messy collection of pelts, starting a proper account book to track what he caught and traded. Her neat handwriting filled the pages with dates and descriptions, bringing order to his scattered records. The cabin itself began to change, too. Cora hung fresh curtains she'd sewn from old flour sacks, swept the floors daily, and arranged Adriel's tools with care. Though she never spoke of it, her touches made the rough cabin feel more like a home. Adriel noticed other changes as well. Cora's laughter came more freely now, especially when she succeeded at new tasks or shared jokes with visitors. The fearful tension had eased from her shoulders, replaced by quiet confidence as she moved through her days. When they needed to ride into town for flour and other supplies, Cora held her head high despite her initial nervousness. The difference in how people treated her was subtle but clear. Some still whispered behind their hands, but others offered genuine greetings. Mrs. Sanders spotted them at the general store and came over to chat, asking Cora's advice about caring for her younger daughter's cough. The storekeeper's wife invited her to join the women's sewing circle, though Cora politely declined. "Things can change," she mused aloud as they rode home, their saddlebags full of supplies. "I never thought people would see me as anything but worthless." They rode in silence for a while, the horses' hooves crunching through patches of lingering snow. Finally, Adriel spoke, his voice rough with disuse. "I haven't prayed in years," he admitted. "Not since my wife died. Seemed pointless to talk to God after that." Cora considered his words carefully before responding. "God listens," she said softly. "Even when men fall silent, like the parent of a hurt child, waiting for them to speak again." Adriel didn't reply, but his face held a thoughtful expression as they continued their journey home through the gathering dusk. The mountain winter settled in with fierce determination. Snow piled deeper around the cabin, and the days grew shorter. Inside, warmth from the constant fire kept the chill at bay, while Cora and Adriel established a steady rhythm to their work. One crisp morning, Adriel announced they needed to harvest ice from the creek. "Winter's the time to stock up," he explained, loading tools onto his mule. "Ice'll keep through summer if we store it right." Cora pulled on her warmest coat and followed him down to where the creek ran slow and deep. Here, the water had frozen solid enough to walk on. Adriel demonstrated how to score the ice with a long saw, creating blocks that could be lifted out with iron tongs. "Careful now," he warned, as Cora gripped the handles. "These blocks are heavier than they look." She set her jaw with determination and lifted. The ice block slid free with a crack, and though her arms trembled, she didn't drop it. Adriel's eyebrows rose slightly, the first hint of surprise she'd seen from him. They worked through the morning, hauling block after block up to the ice house Adriel had built years ago. The structure was half buried in the hillside, lined with sawdust to keep the ice from melting. By midday, both were sweating despite the cold, their breath clouding in the winter air. "That's enough for now," Adriel said finally. "Need to split more wood before dark." The afternoon found them at the chopping block, taking turns with the axe. Cora's strokes weren't as powerful as Adriel's, but she made up for it with persistence, the steady thunk of splitting wood echoing through the trees. Later, they worked together to hang strips of venison in the smokehouse. "This'll keep us fed through lean times," Adriel explained, showing her how, to arrange the meat so smoke could circulate evenly. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Cora found herself studying his movements, learning from his experience. As evening approached, they retreated to the cabin's warmth. While Cora stirred a pot of beans on the stove, Adriel disappeared into the cabin's small back room. She heard him moving things around, then the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. He emerged pulling an old rocking chair, its wood smooth with age and careful use. Cora watched as he positioned it near the fire, his movements gentle despite his rough hands. "Was Sarah's?" he said quietly, running his palm along the chair's arm. "My wife's." Cora set aside her cooking spoon and waited, sensing the weight of memory in his words. "She loved this chair," he continued, his voice growing distant. "Used to sit here every evening, sewing and singing hymns. Said she couldn't wait to rock our baby in it." His fingers tightened on the wood. Neither of them made it through the birth. Understanding bloomed in Cora's heart. "How long ago?" she asked softly. 7 years. Adriel's face was shadowed in the firelight. "Drove me up here afterward. Couldn't bear being around people, their pity, their God." Bitterness crept into his voice. "Packed everything away except her Bible. Couldn't bring myself to burn it, but couldn't look at it neither." Cora moved closer, drawn by his pain. "Grief can make us strangers to ourselves," she said. "After my mama died, I was only 12. Papa," he changed, started drinking more, looking at me like I was to blame for everything wrong in his life. She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering. Said I was just like her, too soft, too fond of books and prayer. Used to tear pages from my Bible when he was angry. Adriel's jaw tightened. "Man like that's no father at all." "No," Cora agreed quietly. "But Mama taught me God can be father enough, if we let him." She paused, then added, "Though, sometimes it's hard to trust that when people who should love us don't." They sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered outside. Snowflakes drifted past the window, caught in the lantern's glow like tiny stars. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Adriel announced he needed to check his trap lines and set new ones before the next storm. To his surprise, Cora insisted on coming along. "You'll need to carry gear," he warned. "It's not easy work." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm stronger than I look." They set out on foot, Adriel's pack loaded with traps and tools. Cora carried a smaller bundle, but it was still heavy with supplies. The snow was deep in places, making each step an effort, but she kept pace without complaint. Adriel showed her how to identify good spots for setting traps near game trails and water sources where animals were likely to pass. His hands were sure as he demonstrated proper placement, explaining how to avoid harming larger animals or domestic stock that might wander by. "You've got to check them regular," he explained. "Make sure nothing's suffering. That's part of the responsibility." Cora nodded, helping him clear snow from another setting spot. By midday, they had checked all the existing traps and set several new ones. Her arms ached from carrying supplies, but satisfaction warmed her chest. She had proven she could handle the work. They returned to the cabin as the sun began to set, their shadows stretching long across the snow. After a simple supper, Cora settled by the fire and opened her mother's Bible. The familiar pages brought comfort, worn smooth at the corners from years of turning. Adriel sat nearby in his usual chair, whittling a piece of wood. Though he didn't join in when she read a psalm aloud, he didn't leave either. His presence felt different now, less guarded, more at peace. The firelight played across his features, softening the hard lines of his face. When Cora glanced up from her reading, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. It wasn't quite a smile, but something gentler than his usual stern look. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and snow continued to fall, wrapping their small cabin in a blanket of white silence. Inside, two souls who had known deep hurt began to remember what it meant to trust, to hope, to heal. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as Cora measured flour into her mother's old mixing bowl. Her fingers worked with growing confidence, adding yeast and warm water, then kneading the dough with practiced movements. The familiar scent of bread making filled the small space, bringing memories of watching her mother at their ranch kitchen table years ago. Adriel had gone to check his trap lines, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the quiet satisfaction of working with her hands. As she kneaded, she remembered her father's sneering words about her being useless. The memory no longer stung as sharply. Here in this mountain cabin, she had found purpose in the daily rhythms of frontier life. The dough rose steadily in the bowl near the warm stove. Cora tended the fire and swept the floor while she waited, humming hymns to herself. When the dough had doubled, she shaped it into 2 perfect loaves and slid them into the hot oven. The aroma of baking bread drew Adriel home earlier than usual. He stomped snow from his boots at the door, his face ruddy from the cold. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, hanging up his coat. "Just in time," Cora replied, pulling the golden brown loaves from the oven. Steam curled up from the crusty tops as she set them on the table to cool. A knock at the door surprised them both. It was the Ute family from down the mountain, bringing fresh pelts to trade. The woman's eyes brightened at the smell of bread, and her children peered around her skirts with interest. Cora cut thick slices from the first loaf, still warm, and spread them with precious butter. "Please, share our table," she invited, gesturing to the chairs. The family accepted gratefully, and soon the cabin filled with the sounds of appreciation and laughter. Though they spoke different languages, the universal language of breaking bread together bridged the gap. The Ute woman showed Cora how to say "delicious" in her language, and Cora repeated it carefully, making everyone smile. Adriel watched from his corner, his usual stern expression softening as he observed the scene. The Ute man examined the pelts with him, discussing their value in a mixture of English and gesture, while their children accepted second helpings of bread from Cora with shy smiles. Before leaving, the Ute woman pressed a beautifully beaded pouch into Cora's hands. The gesture spoke volumes about respect and gratitude. Cora touched the intricate beadwork with wonder, understanding this was more than just payment for bread. It was acknowledgement of her worth as a person. Later that week, Cora and Adriel made their regular trip into town for supplies. The storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Henderson, caught the scent of fresh bread in Cora's basket and asked to sample it. Her eyes widened at the first bite. "Why, Miss Cora," she exclaimed, "this is the finest bread I've tasted since coming west." Would you consider trading? We get good flour and regular, and I know plenty of folks who'd pay fair price for loaves like these. Cora felt warmth spread through her chest. I'd be happy to arrange a trade, she replied, her voice steady and sure. She noticed several townspeople watching the exchange with interest, their earlier whispers of scandal replaced by genuine curiosity. The ride home was peaceful, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow. Cora sat straighter in her saddle, the success of the day adding spring to her spirit. Even the mule seemed to sense her happiness, his steady gait more spirited than usual. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Adriel cleared his throat. Your bread-making's become something special, he said quietly. Reckon you found your calling. Cora felt her face flush with pleasure. Mama always said God gives each person gifts to share. I never thought. She paused, remembering her father's cruel words. I never thought I'd find mine. You've found more than that, Adriel responded, his voice gruff but kind. You've found your strength. After the dishes were cleared away, Cora settled into her usual spot by the fire with her mother's Bible. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the worn pages as she turned to the Psalms. Adriel sat in his chair, whittling a piece of wood but listening as she began to read. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Her clear voice filled the cabin. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. The familiar words took on new meaning in the quiet cabin. Cora felt their truth deep in her heart. How God had indeed led her beside still waters, had restored her soul through unlikely circumstances and unexpected kindness. When she finished reading and closed the Bible, the silence held a different quality than usual. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, she heard Adriel whisper, Amen. Cora's heart skipped a beat. She kept her eyes on the closed Bible in her lap, not wanting to break the moment's fragile beauty. It was the first time she'd heard him pray since coming to the cabin. Through her lowered lashes, she saw him staring into the fire, his whittling forgotten in his hands. The lamplight caught the moisture in his eyes, and she understood. Something long frozen was beginning to thaw. They sat together in the gentle quiet, each lost in their own thoughts but bound by something stronger than words. Outside, snow began to fall again, adding another layer to the white blanket covering the mountain. Inside, warmth spread beyond, the reach of the fire, touching places in their hearts that had been cold for far too long. Cora realized, watching the shadows dance on the cabin walls, that she had found more than just safety in this place. She had found purpose, respect, and something else. Something that made her heart flutter when Adriel's eyes met hers across the room. Their shared life had grown into more than mere circumstance, though neither of them had spoken of it yet. The evening deepened into night, but neither moved to end it. The fire crackled softly, casting its warm light over them both, while outside the wind whispered through the pines. In this moment, Cora knew with certainty that God had led her exactly where she needed to be. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold, the winter sun glinting off fresh snow. Cora stood before the small mirror in the cabin, smoothing her best dress, one she had carefully mended and pressed the night before. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned her hair, wondering how the town would receive them at church. Adriel waited by the horses, dressed in his cleanest shirt and coat. He had shaved carefully that morning, his usual stubble replaced by smooth skin that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. The sight made Cora's heart flutter. Ready? He asked, helping her mount. His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, warm through her worn glove. The ride to town was peaceful, their horses' hooves crunching through crusty snow. The morning light painted the mountains gold and rose, and Cora found herself humming hymns under her breath. Adriel rode beside her, quiet but present, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers when the trail narrowed. As they approached the white-painted church, Cora's stomach tightened. Several wagons were already parked outside, and people milled about on the steps. The buzz of conversation died as they rode up, replaced by pointed whispers behind gloved hands. Adriel dismounted first, then helped Cora down, his hands steady at her waist, She felt the stares but held her head high, remembering the strength she had found in these past weeks. The preacher stood at the door, greeting people as they entered. His eyebrows rose slightly at their approach, but he nodded politely. "Miss Cora, Mr. Boone," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Welcome to the Lord's house." Inside, the small church smelled of pine boughs and lamp oil. Cora noticed immediately that several hymnals lay scattered on the floor near the pulpit, dropped perhaps during morning preparations. Without hesitation, she moved forward to help, gathering the books and arranging them neatly in the pews. The preacher watched her with interest. "Much obliged, Miss Cora. Would you mind helping me set out the rest? My arthritis makes it difficult these morning." "Of course," she replied softly, aware of eyes following her movements. She worked efficiently, placing hymnals at regular intervals along the wooden pews. As she reached the back of the church, she heard a child's wet cough. A young mother sat there, cradling a feverish boy of perhaps 4 years. The child's face was flushed, his breathing labored. Cora recognized the symptoms from her recent experience with the sick child at the cabin. "May I?" she asked the mother gently, reaching out to feel the boy's forehead. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Cora pulled her handkerchief from her pocket, went to the water pitcher by the door, and dampened the cloth. She showed the mother how to cool the child's face and neck, then reached into her basket for the herbs she had learned to carry after that night of nursing the other fever. "Steep these in hot water," she whispered, passing over a small packet. "It will ease his breathing." The mother's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Others just moved away from us, afraid of catching it. Adriel had taken a seat halfway up the church, his broad shoulders straight and tense. But Cora saw the pride in his eyes as she moved about helping others. She finally slipped into the pew beside him just as the service began. The congregation sang with spirit, their voices rising to the rafters. Cora's clear soprano joined in, and after a few hymns, she realized Adriel was humming softly beside her. Her heart swelled at this small sign of his returning faith. When the preacher rose to deliver his sermon, his eyes swept the congregation and settled briefly on Cora. His text was from Matthew. "By their fruits ye shall know them." As he spoke about faith shown through works of kindness, several heads turned toward the back pew, where the sick child now rested more comfortably. After the final hymn, people began to file out into the cold sunshine. The preacher caught up with Cora and Adriel on the steps. "Miss Cora," he said clearly, his voice carrying to those nearby, "I want to thank you properly for your help today. Your actions show the true fruits of faith, not just in words, but in deeds of mercy." He turned, to include Adriel, in his gaze. "You're both welcome here any Sunday you can make the ride." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Cora saw several townspeople nod in agreement, though others still frowned and turned away. It was a beginning, at least. The ride home seemed shorter, warmed by the morning's events. They stopped to rest the horses at the halfway point, sharing bread and jerky in comfortable silence. The winter sun hung low in the sky by the time they reached the cabin. While Cora prepared their evening meal, Adriel built up the fire and filled the water bucket. The familiar domestic routine felt different somehow, charged with unspoken emotion. Over supper, they talked about the service, the sick child, the preacher's words. "You've changed things," Adriel said suddenly, his voice rough with feeling. "Not just here in the cabin, but in town, too. People are starting to see what I saw that first day." Cora looked up, startled by his tone. "What did you see?" "Strength, kindness, true faith, not just show." He pushed his plate away, his eyes intense. "I thought I was rescuing you that day, but truth is, you're rescuing me, bringing life back to this place. To me." Cora's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "Adriel, I've been alone so long," he continued, the words coming faster now. "After Sarah died, I thought that was all there was for me, silence and solitude. Then you came, with your quiet ways and your fierce heart, and everything changed." Tears pricked Cora's eyes. "You gave me safety when no one else would. You saw me as a person, not a burden. You're so much more than that. Adriel's hand reached across the table to grasp hers. You're a miracle I never thought to pray for. The touch of his rough palm against hers sent warmth spreading through her entire body. They sat there, connected by clasped hands and shared understanding, as the fire crackled and evening shadows lengthened on the cabin walls. Finally, Adriel's expression sobered. There's something you should know, he said reluctantly. Your father's been in town, spreading poison, saying I bought you for wicked purposes, that you're living in sin up here. Some folks are starting to believe him. Cora's happiness dimmed, but didn't disappear entirely. What can we do? For now, we're careful. We keep going to church, showing them the truth by our actions. His grip on her hand tightened. But sooner or later, there'll be trouble. Your father won't let this rest. I'm not afraid, Cora said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Not anymore. Not with you. Adriel's eyes softened as he looked at her across their joined hands. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and somewhere in the distance a wolf called to its mate. Inside the cabin, two hearts beat in growing certainty of their shared path, even as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Dawn broke pale and cold over the fried mountain, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of pearl. Cora stood at the cabin window, watching Adriel split wood for the morning fire. The routine had become precious to her, his steady rhythm with the axe, the sharp crack of wood, the way he'd pause to brush snow from his shoulders. These simple moments held more peace than she'd known in all her years at the ranch. The kettle bubbled on the stove, and she had just turned to pour their morning coffee when she heard it, the thunder of hooves pounding up the trail. Many hooves, moving fast. Adriel heard it too. He straightened, axe still in hand, eyes narrowing at the bend in the trail. 3 riders burst into view, their horses' flanks dark with sweat despite the cold. Cora's heart stopped. Her father led them, his face twisted with rage, flanked by 2 ranch hands she recognized, Brady and Wilson, rough men who enjoyed their work with the cattle whip too much. No, she whispered, pressing against the window frame. Please, no. The riders reined up hard in the yard, snow spraying from their horses' hooves. Her father's voice boomed out, sharp as a gunshot in the mountain quiet. Boone, you kidnapping bastard! Show yourself! Adriel set the axe carefully against the chopping block, his movements deliberate and calm. But Cora saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. Morning, rancher, he called evenly. No need for shouting. I can hear you fine. Her father swung down from his horse, boots crunching in the snow. The ranch hands followed, spreading out to flank Adriel. Their hands rested too close to their gun belts. You stole my daughter, her father snarled. Lured her up here to shame her. The whole town's talking about your sin. That's not true, Adriel said quietly. You sold her, remember? For 1 gold coin, in front of witnesses. A father's rights can't be sold. She's coming home where she belongs. Cora couldn't stand it anymore. She rushed out the cabin door, ignoring the bitter cold biting through her dress. I won't go back. You can't make me. Her father's face darkened. Still fat and willful as ever, I see. This mountain devil's corrupted you worse than I thought. He jerked his chin at Brady and Wilson. Get her in the wagon, and if this kidnapper resists, show him what we do to wolves that steal our stock. Don't touch her, Adriel warned, stepping forward. His voice was low but carried steel. She's a free woman, not property. She stays if she wants to stay. Take him, her father commanded. The ranch hands moved with brutal efficiency. Brady swung first, a heavy fist catching Adriel in the jaw. He staggered but didn't fall, wouldn't raise his hands to fight back. Wilson tackled him from behind, driving him to his knees in the snow. Stop it, Cora screamed. Please stop. She tried to run to him, but her father caught her arm in an iron grip. She struggled as Brady and Wilson rained blows on Adriel, their fists making sick, wet sounds against flesh and bone. Blood spattered the snow, brilliant red on white. Still, Adriel wouldn't fight back. He took the beating silently, only his eyes speaking, fixed on Cora with a mixture of sorrow and determination that broke her heart. "That's enough," her father said finally. "Get her in the wagon." He dragged her struggling across the yard to where their wagon waited on the trail. She fought every step, but his grip was too strong, his fingers digging bruises into her arm. "Adriel!" she cried out as they lifted her into the wagon bed. "Adriel! Please!" He raised his head from the bloodied snow, one eye already swelling shut. "Stay strong, Cora," he called hoarsely. "Remember who you are. Remember what we found here." Brady kicked him hard in the ribs, cutting off his words. Her father threw a rough blanket over her and lashed it down, trapping her in the wagon bed. She thrashed against the bonds as he climbed onto the seat and snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward. Through tears, Cora saw Adriel trying to rise, only to be knocked down again by Wilson's boot. Brady laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the mountains. "Leave him," her father ordered. "The cold will finish what we started." Snow began to fall as they rattled down the trail, fat flakes that would soon cover their tracks. Cora's heart pounded with fear and rage, each bump of the wagon wheels taking her further from the only real happiness she'd ever known. She thought of Adriel, lying bleeding in the snow, of their quiet evenings by the fire, of prayers whispered in the dark. All of it stolen away in one violent morning. The wagon creaked around the bend in the trail. The last thing she saw before the cabin disappeared from view was Adriel, on his knees in the blood-stained snow. One hand reached out toward her, his face a mask of helpless anguish. Then the trees closed in, and he was gone. The snow fell harder, and the cold wind carried the sound of her father's satisfied humming from the wagon seat. Cora pressed her face into the rough blanket and wept, not for herself, but for the good man she'd left behind, and for all the gentle dreams that lay shattered in the snow. The ranch house loomed dark against the winter sky, its windows like watchful eyes. Inside, Cora sat on her narrow bed, listening to her father's boots pace the floorboards outside her locked door. The room felt smaller than she remembered, stripped of everything but the bed and a wash basin. Even her mother's Bible had been taken away. "You'll leave for Missouri next week." Her father's voice growled through the door. "Your cousin Martha will sort you out. Too long I've let you shame this family with your stubborn ways." Cora's hands clenched in her lap. "I won't go." The pacing stopped. "What did you say?" "I won't go to Missouri." Her voice grew stronger. "I'm not property to be traded or sent away." The door shuddered under his fist. "You're my daughter. The law says you'll do as I say until you're properly married." "The law?" Cora stood, anger burning through her fear. "What about the law when you sold me for a gold coin? What about God's law of kindness?" "Don't you dare preach at me, girl. That mountain devil filled your head with nonsense. A month with Martha will set you straight." His boots stomped away down the hole. Cora sank to her knees beside the bed, clasping her hands in prayer. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered. "Help me stand firm in truth, like Daniel in the lion's den." Days crawled past. Her father kept her under constant watch, meals appearing through a slot cut in the door. Ranch hands patrolled outside her window day and night, but Cora refused to break. She spent hours in prayer, remembering the peace she'd found in Adriel's cabin, the dignity he'd shown her, the way his eyes had softened when she read from Scripture. In town, unease spread like ripples in a pond. The storekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, remembered clearly the day Adriel had come to town with the preacher. He gave back that coin. She told anyone who would listen. Said he wouldn't hold any debt over the girl. Seemed right troubled about the whole business. At Sunday services, Cora's empty pew spoke volumes. The congregation shifted uncomfortably, hymns falling flat without her clear voice joining in. Children asked why she no longer helped with their lessons. Even those who had whispered against her now felt the weight of her absence. On the second Sunday after Cora's imprisonment, the circuit preacher's horse appeared on the ranch road. He dismounted stiffly, his weathered face stern as he approached the house. Cora heard her father's angry greeting through her window. "What brings you out here, preacher?" "We won't be at services today. I've come to see Cora." The preacher's voice carried clear and firm. "The congregation is concerned. She's indisposed, being disciplined for her sins." "Sins?" The preacher's tone sharpened. "Like the sin of treating your daughter as merchandise? That gold coin you took burns in my pocket still. You keep out of family business?" Her father's voice rose. She shamed herself, living unchaperoned with that mountain man. "Adriel Boone returned that coin to me the very next day," the preacher countered. "He wanted no part in treating a human soul as property. Now, where is she?" Cora pressed against her door, heart pounding. Her father's boots scraped on the porch boards. "She's not receiving visitors. Now get off my land before." "I'm here," Cora shouted through the door, her voice ringing out strong and clear. "Father sold me like cattle in the town square. But Adriel Boone treated me with Christian decency. He gave me shelter, taught me skills, showed me respect." "Quiet in there," her father roared. But Cora wouldn't be silenced. "He never laid a hand on me, never spoke an unkind word. He showed me I had worth beyond my size or my father's shame." Her voice carried across the yard, drawing ranch hands from the bunkhouse. Windows opened in the cook's house. Even the horses in the corral lifted their heads at the commotion. "He offered me freedom to stay or go as I chose," she continued. "The only shame here is how my own father values a coin above his daughter's dignity." I said, "Be quiet." The door rattled under her father's fist. "Let her speak," the preacher commanded. His voice grew louder, addressing the gathering crowd. "Let truth be heard. This girl has shown nothing but Christian virtue." While others whispered, "She tended sick children," while others judged, "She shared her bread." "Is this how we reward goodness? With locks and threats?" Murmurs rose from the ranch hands. Cora pressed her advantage through the door. "I won't be sold again. I won't be shipped east like unwanted cattle. God made me in his image, and I claim that dignity now." Her father swore violently. "I'll break down this door, girl." "Stand back, rancher." The preacher's voice carried steel. "Enough violence has been done. The town will hear of this, how you've imprisoned your own daughter for the crime of finding respect and kindness. How you took coin for her freedom, then stole it back through force." "Get off my land," her father bellowed. "All of you." But Cora could hear boots shuffling, voices rising in concern. Her truth had been spoken, heard by witnesses. She sank to her knees, trembling but strong in her conviction. Through her window, she watched the preacher mount his horse, his back straight with purpose. "This isn't finished," he called to the house. "God's justice moves slowly sometimes, but it moves surely. That girl's dignity will be restored." Cora closed her eyes, peace settling over her despite her imprisonment. She had found her voice at last. The truth was out, carried on the wind like seeds that would take root and grow. Let her father rage and threaten. She knew now who she was. Not property to be sold or shipped away, but a child of God, worthy of respect and capable of standing firm in her convictions. She heard her father's boots retreat down the hall, his angry mutters fading. Outside, the ranch hands dispersed slowly, their usual rough jokes subdued. The afternoon light slanted through her window, and Cora began to pray again, not in desperate pleading now, but in quiet gratitude for the strength to speak truth to power. Whatever came next, she would face it with the dignity Adriel had helped her discover in herself. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain town. Frost sparkled on wooden walkways as townspeople gathered in the church square, drawn by the urgent tolling of the bell. The preacher stood on the church steps, his face grave as he watched the growing crowd. Shop owners left their stores. Mothers clutched children's hands, and ranch hands drifted in from the livery, their curiosity plain on their faces. "Brothers and sisters," the preacher called out, his voice carrying across the square. "I've called you here today because a great wrong demands witness. The Lord commands us to seek justice and defend the oppressed." A wagon rumbled up the street, kicking up dust. Two of the rancher's men sat in front, rifles across their laps. In the back, Cora sat straight-backed despite her bound hands, her face pale but determined. Her father rode alongside on horseback, his expression thunderous. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, reining in his horse. "You've no right to interfere in family matters. When sin is done in public view, it must be addressed in public view," the preacher answered firmly. "Let the girl down from that wagon, gently, mind you." The crowd pressed closer, muttering. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her usually cheerful face stern. "Look how they've bound her like a criminal. Shame on you, binding a Christian girl." More voices joined in, and the ranch hands in the wagon shifted uncomfortably. One reached down to help Cora descend, then quickly untied her hands. She stood straight, smoothing her skirts with dignity. A stir went through the crowd as another figure appeared at the edge of the square. Adriel Boone walked slowly toward them, favoring his left leg. His face was bruised, one eye still swollen, but he carried himself with quiet strength. He stopped several paces from Cora, respecting propriety even now. "You dare show your face here?" the rancher snarled, starting to dismount. "Stay on that horse," the preacher commanded. "This is God's ground, and violence will not be tolerated." He turned to address the crowd. "Many of you witnessed what happened in this very square weeks ago. A father sold his daughter for a single gold coin. Today, we'll hear the truth of what followed." "There's nothing to hear," the rancher interrupted. "That mountain devil took advantage." "Silence." The preacher's voice cracked like a whip. "Cora will speak, and you will listen, or so help me. I'll have the sheriff ride up from Denver to settle this matter. Instead." Cora stepped forward, trembling slightly but holding her head high. From her pocket, she drew out her mother's worn Bible, holding it like a shield before her. "My father sold me," she began, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the hushed square. "Sold me like cattle, for a single gold coin. He did it here, before God and all of you, calling me worthless and unwanted." The rancher started to speak, but a dozen harsh looks from the crowd silenced him. "Adriel Boone took me to his cabin," Cora continued, "but not as property, as a person in need of shelter. The very next day, he returned that coin to Preacher Matthews, refusing to hold any debt over me." Her voice grew stronger. "He gave me the choice to stay or go as I pleased. He taught me to split wood, to tend livestock, to prepare pelts. He showed me respect when my own father showed only cruelty." She turned to face the crowd directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I learned there that God made me for more than shame. This Bible was my mother's last gift to me, and in its pages I found strength to stand tall, to work hard, to show kindness to others. I helped tend sick children, shared bread with neighbors, joined in worship right here in this church." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several women nodded, remembering Cora's gentle help with their little ones. "Then my father came with armed men." Cora's voice caught, but stayed firm. "They beat a good man who had shown only decency. They dragged me away and locked me up, threatening to ship me east like unwanted freight." The preacher stepped forward then, reaching into his coat. "I have here the proof of her words." He held up a gold coin that caught the morning light. "This is the very coin Adriel Boone returned to me, refusing to participate in treating God's child as merchandise." Gasps and angry mutters swept the crowd. The rancher's face darkened with rage. "That proves nothing," he shouted. "She lived alone with a man, defying all propriety." "I lived in honor," Cora declared, her voice ringing out. "I found safety when you cast me out. I found dignity when you heaped shame upon me. I found faith when you mocked my prayers." She lifted her mother's Bible higher. "God has given me strength, not shame. He has shown me my worth through the kindness of others, while you showed only cruelty." "Lies!" the rancher roared, finally swinging down from his horse. "I'll not stand here and be accused by my own flesh and blood." But the tide had turned. The townspeople pressed forward, faces hard with judgment. "Mrs." Henderson stepped up beside Cora, putting an arm around her shoulders. The livery owner moved to stand near Adriel, offering silent support. We've all seen the truth of it, the preacher declared. This girl has shown nothing but Christian virtue. She's worked hard, shown kindness, attended worship faithfully, while you, sir, sold your own daughter like chattel, then tried to hide your sin with violence and lies. The rancher looked around wildly, finding no allies in the crowd. Even his own men were backing away, shame evident on their faces. The coin speaks truth, the preacher continued, holding it up again. Returned freely, proving no ownership was ever claimed. We've all witnessed Cora's dignity these past weeks, her gentle spirit, her willingness to help any in need. And we've seen your rage, your cruelty, your attempts to hide truth behind force. More townspeople moved to gather around Cora, forming a protective circle. Mothers who remembered her kindness to their children, men who had seen her hard work, neighbors who had shared her bread, all stood as silent witnesses to her character. You can't do this, the rancher sputtered, but his voice held more desperation than authority now. She's my daughter. She's a child of God, the preacher corrected firmly, and she has found more fatherly love and Christian charity than in your household. The town has heard truth. Today, we've seen proof of innocence and proof of wrong. How we proceed from here will show our own Christian character. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the church square as justice unfolded in the clear mountain air. Cora stood surrounded by support, her mother's Bible pressed close to her heart, while her father's power crumbled in the face of truth revealed. The rancher's face contorted with fury as he realized his control was slipping away. Like a cornered wolf, he lunged forward suddenly, reaching for Cora with grasping hands. You ungrateful little... Before he could finish, 3 townsmen grabbed him. Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, wrapped powerful arms around the rancher's chest, while 2 others seized his flailing arms. The rancher kicked and cursed, his composure shattering completely. "Let me go. She's mine to deal with," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. His hired hands, still mounted on their horses at the edge of the square, exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they turned their mounts and spurred away, dust rising behind them as they abandoned their employer to face the town's judgment alone. Cora, trembling but unafraid, looked toward Adriel. Their eyes met across the space between them, and something unspoken passed between their hearts. She ran to him then, her skirts rustling against the packed earth. Despite his bruised ribs and injured leg, Adriel opened his arms wide. She fell into his embrace as naturally as leaves falling in autumn. He held her close, one hand gentle against her hair, the other steady at her back. His wounds must have pained him, but he showed no sign of it, focusing only on offering comfort and protection. "No!" the rancher howled, struggling against the men who held him. "I forbid this. She's under my authority." The preacher stepped forward, his voice ringing with conviction. "You sold that authority for a gold coin, sir, then tried to reclaim it through violence. But God's children are not chattel to be bought and sold." He turned to face the congregation gathered in the square. "Before these witnesses, I declare Cora free from all claims of ownership. She may choose her own path forward, as God leads her heart." Women moved forward from the crowd, their faces soft with compassion. Mrs. Henderson draped a warm shawl around Cora's shoulders. The baker's wife pressed a loaf of fresh bread into her hands. The seamstress touched her cheek gently, whispering, "You're worth more than gold, child. Don't ever forget that." More women gathered close, offering small gifts, a jar of preserved peaches, a warm knitted scarf, a packet of tea. Each item represented not just physical comfort but acceptance, welcome, restoration of dignity. Tears flowed freely as the women embraced Cora, murmuring prayers and words of encouragement. "The wagon's ready," Adriel said softly. He had unhitched his horse and mule from where he'd left them at the livery. The familiar wagon stood waiting, a symbol of the journey home. Cora nodded, clutching her mother's Bible close. Together they walked toward the wagon, their fingers intertwined. Adriel's limp was pronounced, but he moved with quiet determination. When they reached the wagon, he helped her up onto the seat with careful hands. Snow began to fall as Adriel climbed up beside her. Fat, gentle flakes drifted down from pearl-gray skies, but there was no bite of winter's cruelty in them. Instead, they settled like a benediction, pure and clean, covering the scratched earth where the struggle had taken place. The townspeople stood in reverent silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. They had witnessed more than just justice today. They had seen love triumph over hatred, dignity overcome shame, faith defeat fear. The snow continued falling, transforming the square into holy ground. The rancher had stopped struggling, sagging in the townsman's grip. His face was ashen as he watched his daughter seated beside. The mountain man, her head held high, no longer cowed by his criticism and control. All his power had crumbled like autumn leaves in winter's first frost. "Best take her home now," the preacher said quietly to Adriel. "God go with you both." Adriel nodded, gathering the reins in his hands. The mule's harness jingled softly as they started forward, snow crunching under the wagon wheels. Cora leaned slightly against Adriel's shoulder, peace settling over her face like the falling snow. The congregation watched in silence as the wagon moved slowly through the square. Women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Men removed their hats in respect. Children stood still, sensing the weight of the moment. They had witnessed something profound, the triumph of love over cruelty, of truth over lies, of God's justice over man's greed. The snow continued to fall, blessing the way home with gentle grace. The wagon creaked up the snowy mountain trail as dusk settled over the peaks. Adriel guided the team carefully, mindful of ice patches hidden beneath fresh powder. Beside him, Cora held her mother's Bible close, a peaceful smile touching her lips despite the cold. They had come full circle, returning to the cabin where their story had begun, but everything had changed. When they reached the cabin, smoke from a nearby fire caught Adriel's attention. Their Ute neighbors had been watching over the place in their absence. Fresh tracks in the snow showed they had kept the livestock fed and the paths clear. "Home," Cora whispered, the word carrying all the weight of belonging she had never known before. Adriel helped her down from the wagon, his touch gentle despite his injuries. Inside the cabin, he moved straight to the hearth while Cora shook snow from her shawl. His hands were steady as he laid kindling and struck the flint. Soon, warmth began spreading through the familiar space. Cora walked to the stone mantel, running her fingers along its rough surface. With reverence, she placed her mother's Bible in the center. The leather-bound book seemed to belong there, like the final piece of a picture falling into place. "Will you pray with me?" she asked softly, turning to face Adriel. He stood still for a moment, shadows from the growing fire playing across his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. Together they knelt on the wooden floor, their shoulders touching. Adriel's voice was rough with emotion as he spoke his first prayer in years. "Lord, I've been angry so long, blamed you for taking Sarah, but you sent Cora to show me mercy ain't dead, to remind me love's stronger than grief." His words caught. "Please forgive my bitterness. Help us build something new here, something honest and good." Cora's quiet amen mingled with his. When she opened her eyes, there were tears on both their faces. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Outside stood their Ute neighbors, the husband, wife, and their 3 children, arms laden with gifts. The woman held up a wrapped package of fresh venison, smiling broadly. "We saw your wagon," she said in careful English. "Welcome home." Cora rushed to embrace her, while Adriel clasped hands warmly with the husband. The children darted inside, bringing with them the scents of pine and wood smoke. Soon the cabin hummed with life. Cora and the Ute woman worked together at the stove, preparing venison stew and bannock bread. The children helped set the table with tin plates and cups, chattering excitedly in mixed English and Ute. The men spoke quietly by the fire, sharing news of winter game trails and weather signs. When the food was ready, they gathered around the table, 2 families becoming one community. Steam rose from the bowls as they bowed heads in thanks. The Ute woman reached across to squeeze Cora's hand, her dark eyes warm with understanding and acceptance. Laughter filled the cabin as they shared the meal. Stories flowed as freely as the coffee, tales of mountain life mixing with hopes for spring planting. The children played with wooden toys near the hearth while the adults talked, their shadows dancing on the walls like spirits of joy. As evening deepened, their neighbors departed with more embraces and promises to return soon. Cora stood in the doorway watching them go, their lantern bobbing through the trees like a farewell star. She and Adriel settled into the chairs by the fire, their hands finding each other naturally. The lamplight cast a gentle glow across the cabin, turning everything to gold. His thumb traced circles on her palm as they sat in comfortable silence. "I never thought I'd find this," Cora said softly. "Not just safety, but real love. A place where I truly belong." Adriel's voice was tender. "God had better plans than either of us knew. My heart was locked up tight after Sarah died. Didn't think it could ever heal." He turned to face her fully. "But you showed me what mercy looks like, taught me to trust again." Cora leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They sat together, watching the fire dance, two souls bound by something stronger than circumstance. Their home glowed with warmth, alive with promise of all the days ahead. Days they would face as equals, partners in faith and love, their lives woven together by grace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.